Here's the deal, Dave.
It's Greg.
Yeah, I know. I know it's Greg, Dave. But here's the thing. Ever since I put you in charge of social media, it just really hasn't been working out.
It's not my sweet spot, all right? I'm an accountant.
First of all, you don't have to sign your name after everything. What are you, my dad?
Well, again,
And then I have 6 tweets after that that just say google.com. Now, I can't even figure out, like, what was going through your brain when... Were you trying to Google from within Twitter? Please don't answer that. Long story short, my little brother is about to graduate from high school. He's got like 10,000 followers. I don't know how he does it. No one does. But we're gonna put him in charge of this, okay? So go ahead and send me an electronic mail with the usernames and passwords. Think you can handle that, Dave? Or you need to write it down on your little pen and paper here?
I can handle that.
Okay, great. And then after that, we're gonna talk about your future here at this company. Thank you.
You want an email? I'll give you an email. Oh, that's good. I like that. Dear Hipster Doofus, here are your painfully obvious passwords. You bearded, no good, sneaker wearing. Oh, that's good. I haven't heard language like that since the Navy. Just because Daddy owns the company. Ooh, that's dark. But I like it.
Hey, Greg.
Yeah, Mike.
You know you've been tweeting?
I've been twittering!
Well, today in the last message that we've called Paved, Not Paid, Paved, Not Paid, I want to bring the whole thing together. I want to talk to you about the idea of bitterness, right? Because what really happens when words are used against us? Well, in one instance, we're hurt, right? And then that hurt develops into bitterness. And that bitterness, if it's not resolved, can lead to greater levels of damage in our own lives and in the lives of others. To get us kicked off, let me ask you this question. Have you ever heard this statement? Sticks and stones may break my bones, but words will never... Never what? Sorry? Come on, type in the comment section, watch online. Words will never hurt me. How many of you had this growing up, this saying? You've heard this saying, seen it on TV? Yeah. I mean, it seems like most of my childhood from where I'm from was like, well, sticks and stones will make my bones, words never hurt me. And it's a great saying, isn't it? It's a wonderful saying. It's melodic. You know, we can rhyme it off. It's a great thing. But how many of you know it's completely untrue? Right? Because sticks and stones, yes, do hurt and can break bones, but very often bones heal. Bruises disappear. Scars can be covered up. But some of us are still living right now in this room online. We're still living with the damage, the fallout, the catastrophe of words that were spoken over us, words that were spoken to us, and words that were spoken about us from the past. Some of us, that gap is 15 years, 20 years, 30 years. We're still living with those words echoing in our mind. And the problem is that if we're going to build healthy relationships, marriages, build healthy workplaces, if you're an entrepreneur and want to build a great staff culture one day, or maybe you're a musician, want to build a great band, or want to build a great football team, or want to build a great marriage and a great family, the problem is it's so difficult to be a builder when you are bitter. Because, come on, you know what you're like when you're bitter, and I know what I'm like when I'm bitter, and we know what each other are like when we're bitter. When we're bitter, we're short patience, we're nasty, we say things we don't mean, right? But just because we don't mean them, like we learned in week 2, doesn't mean they still don't damage other people. And so many of us are carrying, or have carried, or will carry in the future, bitterness from words that were used against us. The bottom line is this: we can't be a relational builder when we are relationally bitter. Again, we cannot be relational builders when we are relationally bitter. Why? Because hurt people, right? Hurt people. The tendency of people who are damaged and who are sore and who are hurt is to hurt other people, right? Bullies tend to grow up to become bullies. Neglected sons become absentee fathers. Come on, somebody. Forgotten about daughters end up becoming suspicious wives. I mean, when words are used against and hurt us, that causes something in our lives. But here's the sad truth. Ultimately, we can't change that because people are going to hurt us. People are going to say things. They're going to do things. They're going to not do things and not say things. And we expect things to be said. And all these things are going to hurt us. We can't change the fact that life sucks sometimes and people who we love hurt us. What we can be in control of, and what we're talking about today, is what do we do when the hurt comes? Because so often what happens in life is what goes around comes around. And it may be that one day the people that hurt you might need you. It may be that one day people that bullied you work for you. It may be that one day the people that put you down and called you mean names and said you could never make it with your career, with your dream, come and ask for help or some assistance or some wisdom or even some money. And the point is when that time comes, when the ones who are hurt us are now looking for something from us, or when it's vice versa, when we're the ones looking for it, how we respond in those moments and what we say isn't just a kind of caveat to our life. It is absolutely essential in the distinction of our faith, because what we say when we have power as Christ followers really, really matters. What goes around comes around. I remember many years ago, where I grew up on an army base. My father was in the military. And for some random reason, one of the things that we used to love doing as kids was stone wars. Have you ever had this stone wars growing up? But basically, we'd get all these old galvanized roof parts, and we'd build these bases, and we get little tiny pebbles, right? And throw these pebbles at each other and hit the stone. And if they hit you, it was like, like a little thing. It didn't really hurt, and it was fun. It was all like this street versus that street. You know what I'm saying? Like, you're not going to come over and take our territory. So they'd come and attack us, and we'd go attack them. And one day we were having this stone war. I mean, we must have been like, I guess, 9 years old, that kind of age. And one of the dude's older brothers decided to get involved, so he got involved in the stone war. But being a little bit of a bully, and seeing the advantage he had in weight, strength, and everything else, rather than throwing a pebble, he got a full-on rock, just like this one. Actually, it wasn't much smaller than that. And so he decides to lob a rock out into our base. Well, of course, I didn't know he was there. Only afterwards I found out. So I stood up to throw my little pebble, and this rock hit me straight in the face, everybody. Knocked me out stone cold. Like, I just woke up on the ground like, what the heck happened? I went home. I was feeling dizzy. I was feeling nauseous. I was feeling very sleepy. And of course, my dad was like, what the heck happened? Do you know what I'm saying? And I was like, well, so-and-so, who was like 14, 15 at the time, had thrown a rock. And when the kids brought the rock in, it was like this, and said, he threw this at him. Well, I never seen my dad. My dad bolted. I mean, he's a short little man, but he can run very fast. He was gone. And of course, my mother, me, my brother, we're like, where's he gone? But half an hour later, he comes back with a big grin on his face and a sense of satisfaction, because he had found the bully, and let's just say that he had bullied him. And in my dad's own words, he was now not able to ever throw a rock again. So I wasn't there. I don't know what happened. But what I do know is this. So often in life, when we think no one's watching, we think that no one's paying attention, we think our actions don't have any connection to our future, what goes around comes around. The question we're asking is when the bitterness of your past comes around, when the memories come flooding back, when the person standing in front of you, when you're living in the reality of what those words have caused in your life, my question is, what will you let go of? What will you allow to come out of your mouth? And to help us answer this and to deal with this whole idea of bitterness, we're going to look at a very well-known Bible character. His name is Joseph. And Joseph is famous for, put this picture up there, guys, please. Joseph is famous for a couple of things. This, of course, is a famous moment in the story where Potiphar's wife, tries to grab his cloak, and it's an interesting story. We did a whole series back in January called Dream to Destiny, all on Joseph's life. So if you want to go deeper into Joseph's life, you can do that by going onto our website, lighthouschurch.ie, and finding that series, Dream to Destiny. But today, we're going to do an overview, just a quick kind of helicopter tour of Joseph's life, because his story is absolutely inspirational and incredible. If anyone had the right to be bitter with God, and bitter with siblings, and bitter with family, and bitter with the world, it's Joseph, as they're going to find out. But what's so key to Joseph's story is because he accepted the fact that not necessarily good things always happen to good people, and that doesn't mean that God is not there, but chose to embrace God's presence in difficult moments. When the moment for Joseph's dream to become reality, he didn't disqualify himself, because he was able to deal with his bitterness. Now, let me give you some context. Those of you who are new or don't know who Joseph was, I'm going to put up a little timetable here. Because some of you have heard these names. Some of you remember the idea that Abraham, God called Abraham, right? And he had a wife called Sarah, and they had a son called Isaac, right? Isaac married Rebekah, and they had two sons. They had Jacob and Esau, right? And Jacob was later named Israel. And then Jacob went along and had 12 sons, everybody. There you go. There's a faith goal for some in this room. And one of those sons was Joseph. Now, Jacob, Israel, had a couple of wives, but he loved one more than all the rest, right? Which is, interesting, and this kind of leads to the debacle. Why? Because when Joseph's mother, the one that Jacob loved, died giving birth to him, what happened was Jacob, obviously mourning the death of his favorite wife, transferred that love to Joseph, and so he had a very special relationship with Joseph because he loved his mother so much, which, by the way, if you want a quick way of not having marriage issues, don't love one wife more than another. In fact, just have one wife and one life, and you live happily ever after. But basically what happens is the other 10 brothers are very jealous of Joseph. They're jealous of his favor. Some of you know the story. Jacob gave him a very special coat, right? Someone's called a Technicolor dream coat. This dreamer, Joseph had these dreams. And so it comes to a point where the brothers are absolutely fed up of their brother and his arrogance and his insolence and his dreaming and his posturing and the special relationship he had with his father. And so they determined they were going to do something about it. And one day, as they were out in the fields working the flocks, Jacob, Joseph's father, sends him out to check on his brothers, which was probably not a very wise idea. And as he comes along, they decide that today is the day we're finally going to do something about Joseph. So they decide not just to give him a wedgie, okay, or hit him with a few rocks, or give him a few digs, or do the regular things that we would do in our culture, perhaps. They instead decide we're going to sell him. In fact, first of all, they say we're going to kill him. That was their first plan. But then they realize that's probably too much. So the second plan becomes they're going to sell him into slavery. Let's pick up a story right now in Genesis chapter 37, verse 25. 27. We're going to jump around a lot in Genesis today. So it says in verse 25, as they sat down to eat their meal, okay, so Joseph has now been beaten up. He's in a pit. They're figuring out what to do with him. He's, stranded there, not knowing what's happening, not sure if it was a joke or just messing what's going on. They sat down to eat. And as they're processing their plans, all of a sudden, a caravan, not like a thing hitched to a car where people go on holidays, a caravan is in a lot of people with camels are going by. We're told this caravan, this group of travelers are Ishmaelites. They're coming from a place called Gilead. So they're traders going from one major city heading towards Egypt. And the brothers see this caravan and then they say to each other, what will we gain if we kill our brother and cover up his blood? I mean, what a compassionate older brother, everybody. Like, come on. I mean, what will we gain if we kill him? We can't make any money off his death, is basically what he's saying. Come, let's sell him to the Ishmaelites and not lay our hands on him. After all, he is our brother. How many thank God for older brothers and sisters? Right? How many of you had an older brother or sister like this? You know what I'm saying? I love you enough not to kill you, but I'm going to make some money off your demise. You know what I'm saying? So basically say, he's their own flesh and blood, and the brothers all agree. So Joseph, 17 years old, everybody, is ripped from his family, ripped from his culture, betrayed by his brothers, his older brothers, albeit the ones that are supposed to set an example for him. He's first of all put in his pit, then handed over to these foreigners who speak a different language, doesn't know what they're saying. He's been sold to slavery. He doesn't know where he's going to go, who he's going to be sold to, what he has to do in order to perform, the actions he perform as a slave. His whole world is turned upside down. All of a sudden, before you know it, he's gone from sitting at his father's table to being bound up and locked up and been dragged along in a caravan a couple of 100 miles down towards Egypt. In Genesis 39, then we're told this. We're told now Joseph had been taken down to Egypt, and Potiphar, which is a name, it was an Egyptian, who was one of Pharaoh's officials. He was captain of the guard, which means Pharaoh had this very special, elite force that would protect him and protect the city. And Potiphar was the captain. He was the leader of that guard. He was a very important official in Pharaoh's, system. And we're told that obviously, you can imagine Joseph was at the slave trades in the market. He's standing there, more than likely stripped naked. People are looking at him, checking his teeth, checking his muscles, trying to figure out how much is he worth, what value he has, what actions he should perform as a slave. He's 17 years old. And this guy, Potiphar, comes along, sees him, sees his potential, and buys him from the Ishmaelites. Verse 2. But here's the interesting dichotomy. Here's the tension of Joseph's story. We're told in verse 2, Joseph naked, about to be sold to this foreign Egyptian. It says, the Lord was with Joseph. I mean, what? No. If the Lord was with Joseph, his brothers would be in Egypt as slaves, right? That's how it happens. If the Lord was with Joseph, Joseph would be with Jacob. Joseph would not be on the block being sold as a slave. How is God with Joseph as Joseph is being sold into slavery? This really is the point, one of the main points of Joseph's story. We're told that despite all these things happening to him, God was with him so that he prospered and he lived in the house of his Egyptian master. This is really interesting because, again, there's a tension here, right? Because so often we think, if God was with me, or maybe you're here and you're skeptical, you're watching online, you're not a believer. If God was real, that would mean this, right? Because you think, you know better than God does, and you think that, God should do or shouldn't do certain things, and you think that life was as simple as good people get good results and bad people get bad results. But the truth is, life is far more complex than that, isn't it? Because it's like one author, Alexander Solzhenitsyn, said in his book, The Gulag Archipelago, he said, the line of good and evil runs to the heart of every man and woman. Right? You're bad sometimes, right? So should God judge you when you're bad or when you're good? Is it as simple as us earning God's love, or is there a higher, deeper perspective? It seems so strange to us that Joseph was able to prosper, which means he was able to excel, he was able to do well, even though he was sold into slavery. But here's the point. Joseph's story isn't over yet. This isn't the final chapter, it's only the beginning. And so often what we do is we take our whole lives from the first chapter and we think, man, I'm a failure, I'm a disgrace, I haven't achieved this. Like some of you right now, and you're growing up in our world, and if you haven't got a PhD and had bought a house and have a car and have X salary, by the time you're 23, you're a failure. That is complete nonsense. You have your whole life and words said over you and about you and to you, expectations from parents and from culture do not define you. They don't have to define you. Because there's a voice, there's a presence, there's a person who has a plan for your life, and he is speaking, and if you're willing, he is with you all the time. Now you think, man, Joseph's had a bad day. It's at the end of the story. No, it gets worse, everybody. Because we're told in Genesis 39, verse 9, that Potiphar had a wife, okay? And Potiphar's wife decided she wanted to sleep with Joseph. And again, understand, it seems so foreign to us, but in that culture, slaves weren't invited to sleep with their masters, they were commanded to. It was their job. That's the way it worked. It was a terrible, terrible part of human history. And so she commands Joseph to sleep with her, but he says no. He refuses to. And what's so interesting is his motive for why. Because he says in verse 9, no one is greater in this house than I am. My master has withheld nothing from me except you, because you are his wife. So Joseph said, number one, if I were to do this, I would be sinning against my master. Every time we act in a selfish and sinful way, it always hurts other people. I mean, the enemy will lie to you and say, no one will know, no one will be affected, no one will be hurt. But our sinful actions always hurt the people that we care about the most, first of all. But second of all, which is so interesting, he then concludes, not only am I sinning against my fellow man, but I'm also sinning against God, which seems so strange. Why? Because he says, how could I, go back guys, how could I do such a wicked thing and sin against God? Now, just stop for a second. Put yourself in Joseph's shoes. What God? Your brother sold you to slavery. You're in a foreign country. You're all alone. You're abandoned. You're a slave. And you've been commanded to do something that morally you don't want to do. Why would you care what God thinks, Joseph? Why would that be important to you? And again, it brings up this tension of the fact that why do bad things happen to good people? And again, we don't have any fast and easy answers. All we know is that bad things have been happening to good people for a very, very long time. And so we're told that basically what happened as a result of this, of his denial to Potiphar's wife, is that she grabbed his cloak, like the image showed a few minutes ago. She fabricated this lie that he had tried to rape her. The master comes home, he has no choice but to throw Joseph in prison. Verse 20, now Joseph's master took him and put him in prison, the place where the king's prisoners were confined. But while Joseph was there in the prison, here we go again, everybody, the Lord was with him. Yeah, it's easy to say amen when you're reading the story, but when you're the one in prison, it isn't so easy to say amen, right? It's like, no, if the Lord was with me, I'd be back home with my family. I'd be wearing my father's jacket, eating at his table, enjoying my family, living a normal life. But here I am once again in prison. for something I didn't even, I mean, there's only one thing worse, isn't there, than being punished for something you did do, is being punished for something you didn't do. Being punished unjustly. And again, here's this great tension, but yet somehow God is with him and showed him kindness in prison. We're saying, God, if you want to show me kindness, open the door and let me go free. God said, I'm going to show you kindness, but the door won't open. Not yet anyway. And granted him favor in the eyes of the prison warden. There's a recurring cycle wherever Joseph goes, even though people and circumstances try to put him down and beat him up and try to rob him of his identity, every single time Joseph finds himself in confinement in prison, God is with him in such a way that he prospers. Like soon after this, he actually gets so much favor in the prison that he becomes like the most trusted prisoner. He starts doing chores. He's trusted by the warden to take care of other prisoners. I mean, that's quite nice. Yes, but still, the point is, if the Lord was with him, he wouldn't have to be friends with the warden because he wouldn't be in prison. When God is with you, you don't know the prison warden. You know what I'm saying? You know your neighbor. You know the milkman. You're not in talking terms with the prison warden. When God's with you, right? That's not usually how it works in our mind. But the point is, bad things have been happening to good people for a long time. This is part of the story. Bad things, next slide, guys, come on, have been happening to good people for a long time. And the other truth, the other side of this fact is, God has been with good people in the bad times for a long time also. And now we think, like, man, why can't God just stop all the bad things, right? I mean, if only God. Well, the point is this: bad things aren't things, right? Things don't hurt us, right? Like, you don't walk down the street and the rock says, I don't like your hair. I don't like your shoes. Are you overweight? Like, things don't speak to us, right? Who speaks to us? People. People speak to us. People say and do mean things. For God to eliminate the bad things in the world, he'd have to wipe all of us out. Because all of us, even though we'd say we're good people, have done bad things, said bad things. Come on, let's be honest right now. We have hurt those we love the most. It isn't as simple as separate the good from the bad. Why? Because all of us have the potential to be selfish and sinful and evil within us. This is why, as a church, why as a people of faith, we need salvation. We need a Savior. We need someone to come in and break that narrative and set us free from this crazy cycle. And God has been with Joseph. And God right now, whether you see him or feel him, is with you in your deepest and darkest moment, in your most difficult struggle. It may not be in the way you want it, the way you expect, but he is there. And somehow he's working for your good despite all the bad. The story continues in Genesis 41 and verse 14. We're told... I think we've skipped some slides there. So anyway, what happens next in the story is, while in prison, there's these two characters who are arrested who work for Pharaoh. One was a baker and one was a butler, okay? And these two guys, I don't know what they did to offend Pharaoh, but they obviously hurt his feelings. And so in that culture, hurt the Pharaoh's feelings, you're going to be killed. So they're thrown in a dungeon, waiting to be executed. And all of a sudden they have these dreams. And Joseph overhears them talking about these dreams. And God gave Joseph this ability to interpret dreams. So Joseph hears the dreams and says to one, well, your dreams means that in a couple of days, on the Pharaoh's birthday, you're going to be restored back into service. You're going to be given your freedom, and Pharaoh's going to forgive you. But the other one, he said, however, for you, it's going to be different. You're going to be killed and impaled because Pharaoh's not going to forgive you. And what Joseph then says is, hey, when you get back into Pharaoh's favor, when you're in the courtroom, when you find yourself back into freedom, don't forget about me. You know what I'm saying? Like, remember that I was the one that told you and prophesied. I was the one that predicted this whole thing. And of course, you can imagine, as he's restored, a week goes by, a month goes by, a year goes by, 3 years go by, and nothing happens for Joseph. 3 years, and he finds himself still stuck in prison. And all of a sudden then something strange happens. The Pharaoh himself has a dream. And it's a recurring dream. It's like a nightmare. It keeps going on day after day after day. So he invites all his scientists and his mages and all the wise men and all the scholars into the room to try to figure out what does this dream mean. And no one can interpret. And all of a sudden a light bulb goes off, right, in the assistant's head. And he goes, hang on a second. The butler goes, I know a guy, right, who can interpret dreams. I mean, when I was in the dungeon, let's not talk about that, Pharaoh. I had a dream and he interpreted. So basically the butler remembers Joseph and tells Pharaoh, if you need someone to interpret your dream, I know the guy. And so the story continues that verse 14, he sent for Joseph and he was quickly, I love that word, he was quickly, he's now 30 years old. He's been 17 years in slavery. He spent at least 5, 6, 7 years in prison that we know of. He's probably begun to accept, this is my reality, this is my future, this is all I can hope for. And all of a sudden, quickly God intervenes. And maybe you find yourself today struggling. Maybe you feel like you've been struggling for a long time. Let me tell you something. When God begins to move, he moves quickly. It may take a long time before it's the right time, but when the right time comes, God moves quickly. And all of a sudden, he's brought out of the dungeon. He was shaved and changed his clothes because he looked and smelled like dungeon. And he came before Pharaoh. And Pharaoh said to Joseph, I had a dream and no one else could interpret it. Now, just hold on for a second. Remember, at this time in culture, the price for getting something wrong could oftentimes lead to death. So Pharaoh wasn't saying, hey, Joseph, give me your advice on this. Like Pharaoh was saying, I'm going to give you a shot at this. If I don't like it, either you're going back to the dungeon or you're getting your head chopped off. Okay, so there's a lot of pressure. I have heard it said of you that you, when you hear a dream, you can interpret it. What Joseph says next, I think, is so amazing. Why? Because Joseph says in verse 16, I can't. I can imagine the poor butler going, Joseph, what are you doing to me here, bro? Like, I literally put my neck out for you. You know what I'm saying? I can't do it. But God. But God. These two words put together, literally, are one of my favorite phrases in the world. Why? Because I just heard this scenario where things aren't going to work out, the job isn't going to come true, the opportunity isn't going to come true, get a bad diagnosis from a doctor, and it's all like, this is where it's going, but God. Because when God enters into the story, the narrative changes. Because Joseph realizes, I don't have the power to do this. I don't have any power. All my power, all the favor, any ability I have comes from God. So if you're asking me, Joseph, I can't do this. But God. And maybe you're at a point in your life where you've reached the end of yourself, right? And you're thinking, what do I do now? I'm saying if you allow God to move in, if you give God space, maybe you're here and you're watching online, you're not a believer, you're not a Christ follower, why not give God the chance? And you know what? Worst case scenario, if God doesn't get in, if God doesn't reveal himself, you're right, you win. But what if, but God? What if God does intervene? What if God does speak? What if God does have a plan? What if God does love you? What if God does know you? What if God has saved you? What if God has called you? What if God has redeemed you? And what if God has an extraordinary purpose for your life? What if, but God? So Joseph courageously in front of Pharaoh and again, this is quite significant. Why? Because in Egyptian culture, Pharaoh was God. And what Joseph is saying implicitly, again, which required tremendous courage, was saying, Pharaoh, you may be a small G, but the big G is the man with the power. You see what I'm saying? Like, it's so hard, isn't it, to live our faith when all of our peers are looking at us. It's so hard to not compromise, not pretend like we're like everyone else. It's so hard to stand up for what we believe in the face of opposition. But Joseph didn't hide his faith. In front of Pharaoh and all the officials, he's like, hey, I recognize the culture and you're a small G, but you're not the big G. Only God can give. Give. It's not earned. Pharaoh can't demand it. It's not Pharaoh's power. Pharaoh can't command God. Only God can give to Pharaoh what he looks for. I think it's so powerful because we look at our world right now and think about all the governments in the world, all the best scientists, all the best, historians, all the best people working on this thing called the coronavirus, and no man can figure it out. But there will be a moment in time when but God happens. And God says, this far, no further. This is I'm saying. And it's so interesting because we have all these small G gods that we look up to and we almost worship in our culture. And what's so interesting about COVID is all these people, these political leaders, these scientists, these thinkers that 3 years ago were like revered as like small G gods are now running around the place like headless chickens because they don't have the power that only God can give. Yeah, they can make up medicine, they can create treatment plans, we need all those things, but only God has the power over life and death. And so so I just think it's so interesting that Joseph courageously in front of all these people says, I feel the pressure, my life's on the line, you're all going to laugh at me because I understand your culture and you see things, but I believe in God. And God has power to give you answers. Yes. And God has power to answer the desires of your heart. Okay. Now again, this is pretty crucial. Why? Because what Joseph this is so bizarre, because again, let's just keep reminding ourselves of the context. This is Joseph, who's now 30. Okay, the best years of his life he has spent in slavery because his older brothers, the ones who were supposed to protect him and be an example to him and show him the way, betrayed him, right, and hurt him and abused him and sold him into slavery. Yet here we find Joseph standing before Pharaoh, and what comes out of his mouth is, I have not lost my faith in God. Why? Because just because God is silent does not mean that God is still. Just because God is silent does not mean he's not moving. Does not mean he's not working. Does not mean that he's not orchestrating in the background on the unfolding of our destiny as we keep our eyes on him. The problem is when we mistake God's silence for his stillness and we get our hands and try and manipulate and manufacture our future, that's where the wheels come off. I mean, Joseph could have tried to manipulate his way out of prison. He could have tried to manipulate his way out of slavery, but he didn't. He trusted that God had a plan. And even though what was happening to him was awful and evil and terrible, somehow he had this ability to trust God even in these dire circumstances. And as we're going to see in the story, God did not let Joseph's trust down. Genesis 42, the story continues. Verse 1 and 2 and verse 6 and 7, we're told that, so basically again, we just give you some background here as we jump into the next part of the story. Doing a lot of hopping today. So basically Joseph interprets Pharaoh's dream. And Pharaoh, if you maybe heard this group in church, Pharaoh's dream was that there was 7 really fat cows, okay? And they came along, it was all great. And then there was these 7 really skinny cows who ate the fat cows, and for some reason this was a nightmare. And if you don't like cows, I can imagine why that would also be a nightmare for you too. And Joseph basically prayed, and God gave him the interpretation of the dream. The interpretation was that Egypt would go through 7 years of unprecedented harvest. Like, there'd be just harvest, crops, return would be huge. And everyone would sit in their laurels and think, this is the way it's going to be forever. Sound familiar? And then a recession would come along and eat up all that grain. And within 2-3 years of the second half, 7 years, everyone would have forgotten all the good times because things would be so bad. People would be selling children, animals, houses, land, anything they could for food. And so Joseph gives Pharaoh interpretation, but then also offers him advice, which again, culturally was a big no-no. He says, but here's some wisdom, because with the interpretation of the dream, God also gave Joseph the gift of administration, the gift of wisdom. And so he says, what you need to do is appoint someone who knows what they're doing. So for the 7 years where things are going really well, store up grain, build storehouses, store as much grain as you can. So when the 7 lean years come, you can sell grain back to the people, and all the nations of the world who are affected by this famine will come to you, and your stature and your prominence and your eminence will build as more and more people pay you for grain. And so Pharaoh's so impressed with Joseph, Pharaoh decides, well, you got the job. I mean, you seem to know what you're doing, so over to you. And so for 7 years, Joseph is now working. He's free. He's out of prison, working for Pharaoh, running things, almost like in a prime minister-like role, storing up this grain. And just as he predicted, 7 years in, this terrible famine comes. You know, it's hot, it's drought, it's locusts, and it's so bad that the famine literally spread not from Egypt, but all the way up into Canaan, where Joseph's family was, everybody. So what happens next? Well, verse 1, they're all sitting there. Jacob, his 10, now 11 sons of Benjamin, and all the wives and daughters and the whole family are all sitting around, and they're hungry, right? Because there's a famine on. And Jacob, and I think it's so funny. What is it about guys and sitting around just looking at each other? Ever notice this? Is this a guy, like, whenever you see girls kind of talk, they kind of have a coffee, I don't know, maybe they're doing their nails. But, you know, when you see a bunch of teenage guys lounging around and being polite, you know what I'm saying? What is about guys' ability to sit around and do nothing? I don't really get that, but it seems to be something that we like to do. You sit around, like, we sit around in silence and we're okay with each other's company. You know what I'm saying? So Jacob is, like, hungry, and he's looking at his 11 sons sitting around doing nothing, and he says, why do you just keep looking at each other? How many mothers use that? Like, food's not going to fall from the ceiling. The dishes won't wash themselves. You know what I'm saying? Like, what are you doing just looking at each other? I've heard, verse 2, there's grain in Egypt. Go down there and buy some for us so that we may live and not die. It's like, Mom, there's no milk. What are you looking at me for? I heard there's a cow that has milk in the shop down the road. Go you therefore and buy some milk so we may eat cereal and not die. I mean, it just continues for centuries. And so Jacob's like, go down and buy some grain. Verse 6, we're told, story continues. Now Joseph was the governor of the land. Interesting. The person who sold the grain to its people. So when Joseph's brothers arrived, they bowed down to him, which if you read the story in context is a fulfillment of a prophecy, their faces to the ground. Verse 7. Now, Joseph copped his brothers before they copped him. And the reason for this was because Joseph was now completely unrecognizable to his brothers because he walked like an Egyptian. No, it's just my insert. Because he would have been dressed like one with all the the regalia and that makeup. Last time they saw him, he was this little 17-year-old scrawny teenager. Now he's this Egyptian official. They've remained the same clothes, same culture, same looks, maybe a bit older. But Joseph is unrecognizable, so he cops them. He recognizes them, but pretends to be a stranger and spoke harshly to them. Now we're not told exactly what he says. But how many of you know, I know what I'd say, right? Oh, I know, I have a few thoughts there. Maybe you've already said them to your siblings. But again, this is the moment, this is the crux of today's message. Because now the offenders, now the betrayers, now the ones who cost Joseph 17 plus years of his life, now the ones who he was supposed to be protected by, but was abused by, now they were standing in front of him. Now the power balance had been inverted. Now he had the power and he had the authority. And on the snap of a finger, he could have every single one of them beheaded. And the question is, when you find yourself in a position of influence or power over those who've hurt you, maybe it was a comment in the corridor, maybe it was a text message from a friend, maybe it was something hurtful said in the past. When you find yourself in that position, when the bitterness of the past comes around, what will you let go around? So at first, Joseph, who's obviously human, is processing all these emotions. So he speaks harshly to them. Why? Because again, there's a difference between forgiveness and trust. Remember we said last week that forgiveness is treating people in the past, right, differently so that those in the present don't pay the price for that. Like sometimes what we do is we carry forward the pain from the past and we project it on people in our present. People in our present are suffering unnecessarily and unjustly because of what someone else has done in the past. And forgiveness isn't necessarily just jumping in and going, I trust that person. Like Joseph couldn't just trust his brothers after all they did. Trust takes time, but forgiveness can happen in a moment. Forgiveness is choosing to let go. Forgiveness, like someone said, we often quote this, unforgiveness is like drinking poison, ever heard this, and expecting the other person to die. Forgiveness, on the other hand, is saying, I don't have to necessarily trust you or even fully like you, but I'm not going to allow the bitterness of what you've done, the hurt you've caused, to determine and define my life. Forgiveness can happen in a moment, but trust takes time. So Joseph begins to test his siblings to see if in fact they've changed, if in fact they're repentant, because he's already forgiven them, but now he wants to know if he can trust them. Chapter 45 verse 1 says this. It says, then Joseph could no longer control himself. So basically what's happened is Joseph has put them through this test where he sent them back home to bring back Benjamin, the other brother. He orchestrates this lie that Benjamin apparently stole something. He didn't. And then all the brothers basically say, we will give up ourselves. We will sacrifice ourselves for the sake of our brother because we've already betrayed one brother, right? I'm saying, and it's caused our father such great grief. We're not going to, that was a mistake. We were wrong. We're repentant. And so if he's wrong, take us instead of him. So Joseph sees that they've learned their lesson, they've changed their ways, and all of a sudden, even though he's forgiven them, now he begins to trust them. And here comes the moment, the big reveal, verse 45. Joseph could no longer control himself. Before all of his attendants, he cried out, have everyone leave my presence. So there was no one with Joseph when he made himself known to his brothers. Verse 3. He said to his brothers, I am Joseph. Is my father still living? Now again, can you imagine being one of the 10 brothers and realizing your worst nightmare? Not only is the biggest cover-up of your life now being revealed because your brother's alive, but he is the most powerful, second most powerful man in the world. On the snap of his fingers, he can kill you. Can you imagine the shock and the horror and the confusion and the emotion and the sense of grief and guilt and shame when they realize the man standing in front of them is in fact their brother? But the first words out of Joseph's mouth weren't, "You're dead, you're toast, your lunch, you're done. Is my father still living?" Of course, his brothers were not able to answer him because apart from being speechless at the big reveal, they're terrified in his presence. They're shocked. They don't know what to do. I mean, how do you respond to this? I mean, all of a sudden they realize that the one they had power over, the one who they used that power to abuse and hurt and damage, now has power over them. And what goes around comes around. And what they deserve is eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth. Right? You sold me, betrayed me, you hurt me, you stole the best years of my life. Well, now I'm going to come for some vengeance. This is my moment to shine. And so many of us, you're going to have a moment. You're going to have a moment where you're going to have breakthrough, and God's going to bless you, and your dreams will become a reality, and the things that you had in your heart will be yours, and all those, you'll have those moments where you're on top. And the question is, who do you become in those moments? What do you do when you have the power? Well, I can tell you, if you have bitterness in your heart, eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth. But something had happened in Joseph's heart. In Genesis chapter 50, verse 18, the story continues. Because he had forgiven his brothers. Verse 20, he says, "You intended to harm me." You guys, my brothers, verse 20. Next slide. "You intend to harm me, but God." There it is again, but God. You meant to hurt me, but God was not going to allow your intentions to prevail in my life. Yeah, you may cost me some years. Yeah, you put me in slavery. Yeah, it was pretty difficult, but God was with me. And God had a plan. And you expected me now to return, right, like for like. But God has done something in my heart. Because I can see a deeper meaning. God intended it for good to accomplish what was now being done, the saving of many lives. Because here's the bottom line, guys. Our destiny and our dreams and our calling isn't really about us. We're called by God for others. If your dream is all about you, what a sad dream. If your dream is to be famous and to be rich, what a sad, petty dream. I mean, have you ever watched those in Hollywood that have the wealth in the world and their marriages fall apart and they're addicted and they're anxious? I mean, why would you ever want that? I don't want that. Nothing wrong with having money, right? But I want to have a healthy marriage. I want to have kids who, have a stable family. I want to be able to be in the world and live at peace with other people. I don't want to sell my soul for something as trivial as fame. That's what happens when our dream becomes about us. God gives us gifts, talent. He gives us the ability to create and to manufacture, to do things. And God may bless you and prosper you, like Joseph, to the greatest levels of authority and influence. But the point is this, it was given to you, but not for you. It's always given for the people. So verse 21, so don't be afraid. I will provide for you and your children. And he reassured them and spoke to them kindly. What an amazing story. Again, if we're really honest, I put myself in the story, I don't know if I could have finished it like Joseph finished it. I probably would have snapped my fingers a few times. A few heads would have come off. But you see, God was doing something in Joseph's life. Joseph, in these moments, he didn't see it, but so much of his time in Potiphar's house was preparing him to run Pharaoh's kingdom. What he learned in prison when he was all alone and abandoned by the butler was even though the whole world had turned its back on him, God had not. And God had a time where quickly he was promoted. Joseph learned that if he allowed bitterness to get the better of him, he would become like the people who hurt him. Again, if he allowed how the harm they caused him to define him, he would become just like them. But he became bigger than them when instead of retaliating like for like, eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth, he forgave them. My question to you is you will find yourselves, maybe even today, someone's going to text you, you're going to see someone, and they've hurt you. They've really hurt you. Maybe they're called brother, maybe they're called sister, maybe they're called father or mother, maybe they're called friend, maybe they're called boss, maybe they're called colleague. And my question is when the bitterness of the past comes around, when they're the one looking for help, when they're the one reaching out, when they're the one willing to build a bridge, what comes out of your mouth? Because our world is so filled with bitterness right now, isn't it? People just saying nasty things to each other all the time. Honestly, you go on social media and in 5 minutes you're the most negative person in the world. Why? Because it's so full of negativity. And we as the church need to be different. We as a church should be known for what we're building, not what we're destroying, not what we're against, but what we're for. And we're for people, and we're for our world, and we're for our communities. But we can't be relational builders when we're relationally bitter. And I believe today in this room, God wants to deal with the bitterness of our hearts. If we allow him, I think today can be a but God moment. And maybe you're here and things are difficult with your relationships at home or with family, and you're trying to figure out, how do I do this? Well, like I said, you can't be a relational builder when you're relationally bitter. So if we deal with the relationally bitter part, then we can be a relational builder. Every single one of us has a choice. When the bitterness of the past comes around, what will it go around? Do we pay back? Like for like, eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth? Do we throw the stone back? Or do we use the stone to pave a way forward? Funny, isn't it? The stones can be used to smash things and destroy things, or they can be used to pave a road to your future. You have the power in your hand. And somebody may look at you and go, no, you're right. You have every right to throw that rock. You have every right to say that thing. You have every right to get revenge. And in a way, probably you do. But if you want to be a relational builder, if you want to make a difference in this world, if you want to reflect the heart of God in our community, then take the hurt of the past and use it not as a weapon, but as a foundation for a better future. Allow God to speak to you. Allow those people, those names, those individuals be forgiven and be set free. So that maybe, can you imagine, a few weeks, a few months, a few years, we can look back and just like Joseph, we see a but God moment. That God was working in our story to bring about our extraordinary purpose. Pay back or pay forward.